That's sufficient.
Okay.
And Holly, I did notice that there was a couple things that were missing in your staff report.
Okay, great. We can talk about that during the agenda item.
Okay, we are now live and recording.
Thank you for coming here to the Plan Commission for August. This is August 17th, and I'm Scott Sterling, the chair of the Plan Commission. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Indivisible.
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes of the last meeting? Do I have a motion to approve
I'll make a motion to approve minutes as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. I've got a motion and a second to accept the minutes of the last meeting. Is there any discussion? Okay. If not hearing any,
No.
all in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Looks like we've approved them. And now the public hearing for development review 2120. It's at 2714 Pacific Highway, 99 East Hubbard. VLMK Engineering, Jennifer Kimura and Jason
Sailing.
And I hope I didn't murder your names. Site development review to construct a 10,880 square foot building for Reliable Auto.
Yes.
Great. I will pull up the script here one moment. I think Vicki is empowering me with that ability.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, hold, please. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, you should be able to do that now.
Excellent.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Scott Sterling and I'm the chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission, and I will be presiding over this hearing. This is time to and place set forth for the public hearing and the matter of site development review file number DR 2021-2 proposed development of 10,880 square foot automotive repair building with associated parking, landscaping, and other improvements for Reliable Auto and Body. This hearing is open at, just checking the time, at 6:34 p.m. Oregon land use requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing, the city planner will review this material for your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements. Holly?
Thank you, Chair. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code 2.108, which is the IC Industrial Commercial Zone Standards, 2.200, which are the General Development Standards, and 3.105, which are the Site Development Review. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the City Council or the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies that are in attendance, followed by the applicant and all of those who are in support of the application. All of those opposed to the application will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the application. Finally, the applicant will be entitled to a rebuttal period. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly into the microphone for the record before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must formally be placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that, either before or after you speak, please submit the material to Vicki Noggle, who will make sure your evidence is taken care of. Prior to the conclusion of the first evidentiary hearing on a land use application, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. If such a request is made, it will be up to this body to determine if the hearing will be continued to a time and date certain, or if the record will be kept open for the submission of additional evidence.
With this out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow commissioners a few questions. Does any member of the audience have any objections to the notice that was published? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to this matter? To hear this matter? Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or bias? Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report any site visit or ex parte contacts? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or expertise disclosures of any member of the Planning Commission? Okay, hearing none, City Planner Holly Burnham, please give the staff report.
Okay. For the record, my name is Holly Byram and I work for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. My role is consulting city planner for the city of Hubbard. Tonight, my job will be to help the Planning Commission understand the criteria that apply to this case. So this property will look familiar to the Planning Commission. The city just approved a partition of this property a couple months ago. And so now the applicant has returned with their plan for development of parcel 2 of that partition. That partition has not been recorded yet. So of course, this development concept is based upon that recording. So overall, again, the big property is 2.38 acres. Parcel 2, which is labeled parcel B in this site plan, is approximately 1.22 acres, but it has a flagpole. So the acreage is a little bit different there. I want to say right up front that the applicant has submitted a revised site plan to us, which does demonstrate some of the conditions of approval presented in this staff report. So I will show that at the end of the staff report and then discuss the implications for the recommended motion here. So a little background, I've included the zone map as a reminder. This is industrial commercial property, which is a pretty unique zone. It's both sides of the southern part of the 99E corridor. And the industrial commercial zone allows for industrial uses, but also a handful of commercial uses as well. So there's a screenshot from, this is Google Street View image of, this is where the new driveway approach would be. So you're looking east now, you can see here, there's the existing non-conforming dwelling on the property, which is on parcel 1, which is proposed to stay for the time being. Just to refresh our memories, this is what the partition looked like. Parcel 1 was here with a non-conforming dwelling. Parcel 2 is what we're discussing this evening. I will note that the partition was shown to have 24 feet of frontage. We conditioned them to have 25 feet, which meets the city standard for a flagpole width. This site plan actually shows a 34 or 35 foot frontage, so that flagpole will be widening a little bit before we see that final plat, which is fine. So here is the site plan that was submitted. So coming off of 99E, the driveway would come down the flagpole here, and then you'd have your proposed building here with parking and landscaping. And then this area down here was proposed for outdoor storage. And again, this is for an auto body repair shop. So in the Hubbard Development Code, there are a couple different criteria the Planning Commission needs to consider. The first set comes from your site development review section. A asks you to consider the characteristics of adjoining and surrounding uses, and that is simply to ensure that the proposed development is appropriate for this location. The IC zone does specifically allow auto service related uses as an outright permitted use, so no conditional use permit is required. To the east, you have industrial uses. You have 2 existing non-conforming residences, one to the south and the existing one to the west. But again, the city's long-term plan is that non-conforming uses would eventually be redeveloped to become conforming uses. And so in this case, that's not a concern. There will simply be some buffering recommended. In terms of dimensional standards, there's no concerns with the minimum lot size here. The setbacks are met as proposed on the site plan. The building height is well below the 80-foot height limit of the IC zone. Landscaping minimum required here is 10% of the gross area. The applicant states that they're proposing 16%. That may be revised on the revised site plan. And then a couple other items here. Standard language screening and buffering is discussed below. So overall, no concerns there about the compatibility of the location. B is about the drainage and erosion control needs. The applicant did not submit a stormwater or drainage report with their initial application, but they do expect to when they submit their plan set for civil review. And so that's something that Public Works and the city engineer will review to ensure that the stormwater facilities that are proposed, and that's an underground infiltration infiltration chamber, that is sized appropriately for how much impervious surface they're proposing. So that'll be a condition of approval to satisfy the stormwater requirements of the city. C is about public health factors, and that typically relates to connections to public water and sewer systems. There are utilities available in 99E, and there are likely utilities available coming actually from the east from Industrial Avenue, routing from an easement across the adjacent property. The applicant has not shown where those connections will be, but that will be a condition of approval that they show the sizing and location of those utility connections. They'll need to also show the city engineer their water usage estimates, which relates to what size of meter they will need. And then their private service connections are reviewed by Marion County with their plumbing permits. D is about traffic safety, internal circulation, and parking. So here's where I reference that they need to reconcile the difference between the 25-foot width flagpole on the plat versus the 34-foot flagpole width on the site plan. And that's easy enough to do before they record that final plat. 99E is classified as a major arterial in your TSP, and it is an ODOT jurisdiction. So ODOT did submit comments for the site plan or site development review. What they did essentially was include the conditions of approval that were for the partition. And again, just to reiterate, that included closing some of the multiple access points along parcel 1 and consolidating those into the proposed driveway. And then they'll need new approach permits with ODOT. 2.203 addresses off-street parking and loading. And as you'll remember, each type of land use has a different ratio of how the parking spaces are calculated. With this site plan that was submitted using the 10,880 square feet divided by 200 square feet, they were required to provide 55 parking spaces. Their site plan didn't show that, and so that was included as a recommended condition of approval, but we'll discuss their modified site plan shortly. Also in that section is off-street loading requirements. They are required to have at least one loading space, and they've included that. Staff asked them to address this evening if that loading zone is functional, where it's located, because it's not immediately adjacent to the building. So maybe they can just talk about how the loads, the shipments will come in, the deliveries will happen, which doors they'll go in, where the loading zone is oriented. And then also bicycle parking standards. They're required to have 4 spaces. Section E is about adequate noise or visual buffering from non-compatible uses. So this is pretty typical in most cities' codes. When you think about compatibility of the use, you look at the zone, but when you look at things like buffering and screening, you look at the use. So in this case, you have 2 non-conforming dwellings. That's not a problem for the proposed use because it's allowed in this zone. But when it comes to buffering, you do need to consider those non-conforming dwellings. We don't want headlights shining into bedroom windows for as long as that house remains in use. So in this case, they'll need to provide some buffering along at least the southern boundary and part of the western boundary, which is where those 2 residences are. And so that can be provided in a couple different ways. There are some options here. It can be a row of deciduous or evergreen trees. It can be a berm plus planting, or it can be a wall plus planting. And that's really up to the applicant to satisfy that when they submit their final landscaping plan. We want them to be good neighbors here. Criteria F is about the retention of existing natural features on site. There are some existing trees and shrubs on the site. None are proposed to be kept, at least to my understanding, but the applicant will be replacing those when they submit their final landscaping plan. So no concerns there. G is about connectivity of internal circulation to existing and proposed streets, bikeways, and pedestrian facilities. We need the applicant to demonstrate how pedestrians will be protected coming off of 99 and then coming from the parking spaces to the building. And that's important, especially for a car shop when folks might be walking or biking back to get their car. So it's I think, acceptable to expect pedestrian traffic and bike traffic here onto the site. And then H, potential hazard areas. There's no known hazards with this area other than throughout the city. Drainage is always a concern, so they need to make sure and address that in their storm report. So overall, pretty straightforward. Staff is recommending approval of the site development review. I have included some conditions of approval that are recommended. Pretty standard language here in terms of requiring the applicant to submit a revised site plan with more details, which would include making sure they're meeting all the parking counts and the landscaping and irrigation and buffering, bicycle parking, making sure that partition is first recorded in the plat. Just to clarify, in terms of frontage improvements, no frontage improvements are recommended to be required for parcel 1, because those will be required when that parcel develops. But parcel 2 would just have the normal driveway apron and then sidewalk connections where that sidewalk will be in the future. So pretty small frontage improvements, really. Fire department does need to review and approve the final plans. There were some discussions about how many hydrants within what distance of the building, so the applicant will need to ensure that they are satisfying the fire department. The applicant didn't state whether or not they would have a car wash unit on site, but if they do, they'll need to meet the stormwater system regulations to ensure that that water is being captured and not going directly into the stormwater. Let's see. Parking we'll discuss in a moment. Wheel stops required around the perimeter of the property, maintaining clear vision areas. If lighting is proposed, then they'll need to submit a lighting plan and show the specs for that. The Hubbard Police Department does always recommend perimeter lighting for security, and especially for when they're conducting patrols. We'll need to make sure that lighting does not cast glare onto the adjacent properties, however. And buffering. And then as with all site development review approvals, that would be good for 2 years' time. So that would give them sufficient time to record the plat and then submit their revised plans before they start construction. So what I want to do is transition to touch briefly on the site plan I received from the applicant today, because it changes the staff recommendation slightly. So today, once the applicant received my staff report, they kind of thought through how they can meet the recommended conditions. And so they've done a couple things to demonstrate that they can easily meet those conditions. And they've also clarified some important information. And so I'll start with that right up front. In the staff report, we assumed that the entire building, all 10,880 square feet, were going to be the auto repair shop. When in fact, a portion of this building, this back portion here, is storage and warehouse. And so that makes a pretty big difference when you're doing your parking calculations, because in the past, we've allowed applicants to break up their buildings and calculate their parking differently. And so using that calculation, which is 1 space per 2,000 square feet instead of 1 space per 200 square feet, they're only required to have 43 parking spaces instead of 55. And so what the applicant has done is revise their site plan to show that they have, I believe they have 44 spots on here now.
Yes, 44.
Yeah, and now they also have the outdoor storage down here.
Mhm.
And then they've also shown a pedestrian connection here from 99 along the entry driveway, which wraps around the corner. And then you see that pedestrian striped walkway to the front of the building. And then they've also shown bicycle parking spaces here along the front of the building or the side of the building. And so those are the revisions that we've received from the applicant since the site plan. So staff's recommendation needs to change slightly. And that is that if the Planning Commission is in support of this site development, condition R, I'll pull up the staff report again. Bear with me here. Condition R specifically identified that they needed to provide 55 parking spaces. So in the motion for approval, the Planning Commission will need to specify that instead of 55 parking spaces, at least 43 are required. And so that is the staff report. I'm happy to answer questions that the Planning Commission may have, or we can go straight into the applicant testimony.
One thing that I see that was missing
Mhm.
that is usually brought up
Mhm.
is there's no handicap parking.
Let's take a look at that. I'll pull up the site plan. Just because it's already open, I'll pull up the. So if I zoom in here, there is one handicapped or one ADA space proposed here. And I know that the ratio is based upon how many overall spaces are required. So I think the applicant may find themselves needing to add one more ADA space designation here.
Correct.
But
Yes.
ultimately, those ADA spaces are counted in the overall tally, so they should have no problem accommodating that. But they do have a loading zone or a van accessible zone here next to that ADA space, it looks like.
I just didn't see any mention of handicap or ADA spaces, so.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, that's, I know the building inspectors typically address that in their review. So,
Holly, I had a question on the pedestrian access way on the flag itself, on the pole. Does Hubbard have specific language about what, I mean, do we have specific language about it needing to be curbed, or is it just a level, you know, just the same level as the driveway, but with a designation painted on it?
I think that your development code allows for either, and we can let the applicant provide detail about what's proposed there. Because there is another driveway, here, let me share this. Because there is another driveway taking access off of that flagpole,
Mm-hmm.
you might want to ensure that's maybe
Mhm.
a raised surface there to provide a little more protection to pedestrians.
Yes, it is a raised sidewalk.
Okay,
And yeah, number 7, we are ramping down to the paving,
great.
to the striped area.
Okay, any other questions from the Planning Commission?
Are we allowed to inquire what the storage area will be used for? The
Absolutely.
external?
Yeah, the applicant can address that during their presentation. Great question. Okay, I will share the script again.
Are there any questions from staff, from, sorry. Are there any questions of staff from the Planning Commission before we continue and accept public testimony? I will now accept public testimony regarding this case? Would the applicant or their representative like to speak?
No, I believe everything that we've tried to address, Holly has hit every point. I believe I don't have anything that I could add. She's got everything. We pre-gamed this pretty good beforehand, so I don't think I have anything to add really. Unless there's any questions, of course.
We had one from the commissioners wanting to know what the outdoor storage spaces are supposed to be for.
Those are going to be, so they have take parts out and so on from vehicles, and they're gonna use that as a storage area while they're repairing or waiting for parts and so on. So like, well, basically parts of cars that they can't work on, they're just gonna put it there temporarily for a week or whatever. And then when they get to that part, they'll just put it back into the shop to put it back together, back on the vehicle. That is the plan.
Jessica, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I would say too, with all the parking spaces, I noticed that the storage area got smaller. Does that give you enough space?
It did not, Jessica. It was the same. It's still 20 by
Oh,
100 or whatever it is.
okay.
Yeah, it was just it's open, basically. It's completely open. It's a lean-to, basically. And so we, from our initial application, maybe the site plan, well, I hope it's not smaller, but yeah, it was proposed at 20 feet by 100 and whatever it is, and it hasn't changed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell on the new rendering.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Glenn Holum. I was just inquiring about sort of your length of time before this project would begin. And then, I mean, I know you can't give me exact, but just kind of a timeline that you guys are looking at to move forward with this.
If today's approval goes and is accepted, we would be submitting to the county as soon as PBS there in Woodburn draws up the building and engineering, which is my understanding 6 to 8 weeks from now. We would be submitting to the county at that point. And hopefully we'll have, well, I think we should have everything plotted by then. So, and that was another question I had. So if, for say, Barker Engineering takes a little longer to plat the property, I don't see why we couldn't submit something to the, or be allowed to submit if it were approval, the site plan is approved today. Actually, no, we would have to come, yeah, so I'm stepping a little forward. So I just remembered that we'd have to submit hit all those criteria. Actually, it would, if we hit all the criteria, could we submit our plans to maybe put the building in? The earliest that PBS would have the building ready for us would be mid-January, early February. So if we could submit, our plans and our engineering would be ready 6 to 8 weeks like from now. And so we would like to submit to the county. And I don't, Holly, how does that work? That's a question I have.
I will have to go back and look at the condition of approval specifically on the partition, but I believe it says platting prior to building permits. So what you
Okay.
can do is get your civil plans for your site, your landscaping and irrigation plans, your lighting plans, your stormwater permit or report. You can get all those to the city for our review, and then we can get through our review. And then we can check in at where you're at with the platting versus the permitting at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So we can look at that at that point if we're close.
Yeah.
Because it's really, okay, good. That's perfect.
Okay.
Should be-
And, we may be even able to, I don't know if the county is willing to start your review for your structural permits. We'll have to work with that.
Okay. Yeah. I'll reach out to you then when we get to that point, if we need be.
I probably had another question. This isn't necessarily for the applicant. Maybe Holly, you can answer. The non-conforming use on parcel 1, when that goes away, I'm assuming that the driveway then for parcel 2 will be a shared driveway between those two. I'm assuming ODOT is not going to grant another another driveway access point. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I wonder if the applicant has an update with have you had conversations with ODOT yet?
I have, they have the initial approval, and it does show a different, 2 driveways going into the parcel A and 1 and 2.
Okay,
So, if I forget the guy's name down there, but,
so
yes,
they're
I have.
allowing you to keep the existing driveway on parcel A and then add
right.
the new, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and mix the 2 ones that are non-conforming, and yes, exactly.
Thanks for that clarification.
You betcha, Glenn.
Probably this may be a question for you again, Holly. Have we had any long-term issues with standing water in and around that particular piece of ground? As we cover more and more of this with asphalt, because I'm assuming what's being proposed is a very large French well to disperse rainwater. Is that correct?
Right, so it's the infiltration chambers. I would probably defer to Vicky about what they've seen in this area, if she has any experience there.
That's really going to be public works. I believe Mike is on the Zoom meeting if he wants to
Oh,
comment.
great.
I see he's on mute, but
Yeah, up until this point, I have not seen a considerable amount of flooding in that area. But as it is just a dirt field, you wouldn't think that there would be a whole lot because it would perk into the soil. Now, what we're expecting on this is sort of a combination of infiltration, like Holly was talking about, with an overflow for extreme floods into the storm drain system. So I don't actually see a problem with that, but until I get a look at the storm drain calculations from their engineer, we won't know for sure.
Great. Well, that puts my mind to ease. Thank you for the clarification from everybody. I appreciate that. I know we've had issues elsewhere and would like to hedge them if we can. So.
Great question.
Anything else on this? Okay. Is there anyone that would like to speak in support of the application? Not hearing any. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this application? Not hearing any. Is there anyone who'd like to speak neither for nor against the application, neutral? Would the planning commission like the applicant to address any of the testimony? Okay. Before I close or continue the public hearing, are there any additional questions from the planning commission, of staff, or anyone? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners and staff may speak.
I do have one question, Chair. I wonder if the applicant could confirm that the proposed loading zone will be sufficient for deliveries to the development. I'm just concerned that the loading zone is not actually connected to the building. And it's not typical. Typically the loading zone is right up in front of the warehouse doors, so you can load right into the building. I wonder if the applicant could talk about that. This is the loading zone
Sure.
here.
Holly, it is connected. There is well, I guess the loading zone is, but there's a door right in front of the building. So they would be, they'd be cutting across the building going in. There's a door right across the
here.
way,
Okay.
basically. So that would be, that's what we were thinking, since
Okay.
the parking space is on the other side.
Okay. So the delivery trucks would come in and park here and then back out. Okay.
Exactly. And most of those are going to be the, just like the Napa little cars, trucks and so on. They're just getting parts. But there will be a little bigger trucks for sure, with rear ends and all of that. So, yeah, but that is sufficient from what the owners with Reliable brought up to me. So that's going to work for them.
Thank you for answering that question.
And I would assume the same goes for like tow trucks and stuff if the cars are inoperable. There's
The tow
probably-
trucks would be on the north side where they would be dropping up for that big dry area or the crossed out area.
Okay.
So if you go to the north, if you bring, no, the other way. Oh, sorry, it would be south. Sorry. So we were, kind of thinking right where the crossed out area, they'd be backing into there and dropping the towed vehicles in that area.
And then are these just regular vehicles? Are they commercial
Yeah.
vehicles? Just
Yeah. Well, yeah, regular, basically.
diesel,
trucks and-
the whole thing?
No semis, not only, just trucks and cars and vans, stuff like that.
All right.
Okay, not hearing anything else. Public testimony is now over. I will close the public hearing at 7:12 p.m. I will now entertain discussion on the application and/or a motion.
I had all my questions answered.
I would make a motion that we approve DR 2021-02 with the following modifications on condition R, clarifying that the number of required parking spaces is actually 43 and not 55.
I second that motion.
Any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor of the motion to approve this, 1 minute. To approve 2021-2 development review. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, all opposed? It passes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And is there a motion for adjournment?
Oh, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 See you later. Thank you.
Have a good night,
Thanks a lot.
everyone.
Good night.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bill. Bye.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, Vicky.